Within certain aspects of the startup community, there's that drive and there's that mantra to accelerate growth quickly, right? And growth at all costs.
This
type of mentality, work 24 hours, where you need to get things done quickly. But there's a cost. I think that it's important that we start to recognize that it is important for founders to last longer rather than getting burnt out too quickly. And that could be a potential source of failure. That's why I think being very cognizant, very open about what you're feeling and some of the speed bumps you may be going through with your stakeholders is important.
Hey founders, I'm Vishnu, the founder of Invigilo. Today I'll be having an in-depth conversation with Prof Ben on founder burnout. Dr. Benjamin T is the Vice President of Ecosystem and Building at the Office of the Deputy President, Innovation and Enterprise in the National University of Singapore. He has co-founded two medical technology companies, Privy Medical and Hannah Life Technologies in Singapore. Privy Medical was successfully acquired in 2021, and Hannah Life Technologies grew rapidly and has reached a double-digit percentage monthly revenue growth across international markets such as the US, UK, and Singapore within just 12 months of product launch. Let's go talk to him. Thanks for taking time and doing this podcast. So we'll just go straight into our main topic of discussion today, founders burnout. And before we start, just wanted to understand, because you've spent, more than half of your life research materials and a bunch of academic stuff. How does it feel like, taking all that and applying it into something a lot more entrepreneurship related, more startup kind of culture? So how do you transition from there to here?
Right. Okay. Well, great to be on this show with you, Vishnu. I think one of the best founders I've met in the NUS
Thank you.
Ecosystem so far. I'm very proud of your achievements.
Thanks so much.
The way I see is almost everything that we do can be categorized as some form of startup. So I try to link the various aspects of entrepreneurship to my academic career as well. Right, when you want to start a lab, for example, basically you're like a founder of the lab and you have to do all these different things that get you started. Typically involves raising money, making sure the lab is making sure people get the right people hired, you get the right team dynamics going, setting the right direction. So those are very, I would say, the common themes of entrepreneurial thinking, entrepreneurship that can be applied in almost every aspect of your career, whatever career you're in. I think the challenge is that sometimes things do get fairly overwhelming when you don't have the right tools or the right training and the right capability to elevate what you hope to achieve.
Yeah, and I'm sure along the way you face a lot of these struggles or these problems, and most of us do not really have access to your own personal experience and journey. We only hear the end result. So do you want to share a little bit more of the kind of things that would have potentially caused obstacles along your journey, and how does that result in potential burnout?
Very often, I think the mind is like a quite cliche, but the mind can be stretched in many different directions. And sometimes you want to make sure that they are recoverable. So you don't want to go into an extent where you can no longer recover from whatever you're trying to do. And fortunately for us, the human body has many ways to, give you some signs or symptoms around when something isn't probably going too extreme, right? Going too much extreme. And these are signs that you need to watch out for. How do we increase the capacity to manage stress is something that everyone needs to figure out very quickly for themselves. And everybody has slightly different personal experience about how they deal with elevated levels of stress. But I would like to think that stress generally can be used in a positive way for the person. It's just that you have to make sure it doesn't get too extreme.
Yeah.
And we oftentimes have to struggle between a flight or fight response. And what you want to avoid is the flight response, which is typically very conditioned in most people's life experiences to run away from certain problems or once it gets too much. So having the ability to deal with some of these stressors and seeing them in a positive light is quite important to handle burnout.
A lot of us struggle to define what burnout is, and that's why we don't even recognize what burnout or whether we're facing it. So do you have any like a definition that you live by personally, or what do you think is common?
Oh, like what is burnout, right?
Yeah,
I
what
think
is burnout?
Yeah, so usually it revolves around the flight response for burnout, right? Once you watch out for when you start hearing certain maybe voices in your mind saying, oh, it makes you struggle to do something that you know is very important, right? So that's how you can recognize potential high levels of stress.
And as founders, like, most of what we do is pretty much high level of stress. So how do you then differentiate something that is, on the verge of burnout versus, oh, it's another day in my life?
So usually you don't reach burnout until after some time of stress, high level of stress. Just like I think your company has a slogan, it's, accidents don't just happen.
Yeah.
They take some time to develop.
Exactly.
Right. So in the same way, I think that that's what happens in when you reach a burnout category. It means when you reach burnout category, usually what you originally started out to achieve, let's say your startup, you really want to make a big difference, you want to build a product that everyone use, that motivation decreases dramatically. Okay. And that's a very, very sure sign something isn't going right. And I think it's important to start having conversations with close friends or friends that you can share with, right? And I think especially males tend not to be able to share such problems more openly. I read some report somewhere. I think that's something we want to be cognizant about, right? There are many, many avenues of de-stress. How can you reduce your stress? And I think I encourage everyone to find something that works for them, or at least try. When they start to see signs that, you just don't want to do anything anymore, right? Because there's there's two parts to your typical response, and this is actually governed by the more primitive or less, we call the primordial cortex of the brain, that actually handles a lot of these flight response, the amygdala and so on. There's a lot of nice books about it. So try to understand how the brain works. But you want to be able to conquer a very reactive response. And you want to be actively engaged to figure out, okay, this is how I'm feeling today and why. And that helps in developing better stress management for the person.
Yeah. I think it also reminded me of some of the things I do personally, like, understanding triggers, like when you feel a certain way, what actually caused you to feel that manner. And having this whole form of self-awareness and practicing associating feelings with incidents helps you to also identify and differentiate things. Like, what are some of the things that you advise founders to, attempt to like deal with burnout? I know you mentioned support system and just being aware of your feelings. Are there any other active things that you also recommend?
Okay, well, there's always the usual way of getting serotonin, which is a happy hormone, into your bloodstream, and that's usually through some form of activity, exercise and so on, or games. That it's a very natural way. Other ways could be something that it's maybe a hobby that you've forgotten for a long time. You stop doing it, and maybe you want to start doing that again, or just eventually taking a time out for a brief period. Right. So that's another way, and people can go on short trips, holiday, or various ways to address this. Besides using some of the more professional services like psychology, psychiatrists, those can also help, right? But I think having the ability to manage a lot of the stress levels on a day-to-day basis by yourself is absolutely essential for founder health, founder well-being, founder mental health. I think these are oftentimes not considered too much when you have a lot of pressure from your investors, pressure from your friends, pressure from society to accelerate growth quickly. right? And
let's
growth
forget-
at all costs
Yeah, this
type of mentality, work 24 hours,
Yeah.
where you need to get things done quickly.
Yeah.
But there's a cost. I think that it's important that we start to recognize that it is important for founders to last longer, right? Rather than getting burnt out too quickly. Right? And that could be a potential source of failure for investors too, right? So I think that that's why I think being very cognizant, very open about what you're feeling and some of the speed bumps you may be going through with your stakeholders in your company, founders, or your staff is important.
Yeah, on that note, mental health is extremely important and not really talked about these days. I guess it's a lot more popular now, but founders or sometimes solo founders, for example, they go through a very kind of lonely journey where they're the only ones passionate about certain things, and they try to make things meet, and they face a lot of rejections. And I guess there's this culture of them overcoming rejection all the time. That how do you differentiate between knowing when to take a rejection seriously and stop or give up versus saying no to the rejection and then moving forward? Because persistence is very important, but resilience is very important as well. When is it too much? Knowing when it's time to give up versus not giving up.
I think as founders, generally, we have that never say die attitude, right? We don't give up. We never give up, right? And I think that's very important to success of whatever you're trying to do. I think it's important then, as you face some of these rejections, to then think about, well, maybe there's a reason, and I've not considered the reason, and I need to start thinking about, maybe I need to tweak my thinking around the product I'm building, the service I'm building. Is it even a big enough problem that you're trying to solve, right? So having a never say die attitude is essential, but having the ability to be flexible enough to look at problems they're trying to address in new ways is critical to the growth of any company. Because it is very rare that a company becomes highly valued or really generate huge impact from the first product they launch, or the first idea they thought about or they have brought to market. It's very rare. I think that the growth is often very lumpy for a startup. You may be some months you hit really good sales numbers, and another month it could be zero, right?
Yeah.
There's something that everybody has, I think, as founders, specific to the founder community, will face and grapple with as they grow their company. And they have to know that this is the case. And there are many, many excellent literature out there that they can probably try to read up on about why growth is lumpy. But if they continue to manage their stress levels as they grow, I think that the outcome will be extremely rewarding, both personally and also to the company's financial metrics.
Yep. And I mean, you also initially mentioned investors do look at founders burnout as an evaluation criteria. How often do you think that is the case, and how do you think anyone can evaluate that whether this founder is someone who's prone to burnout?
It depends on different categories of investors and how involved they want to be, right? So usually when in the due diligence process, investors will look at talking to not just your friends, but your friends of friends, the broader network, just to get a much better sense of how you handle stress. And they do the assessment every time you talk to them. And I think even after they invest in you, they also want to make sure that you're growing well emotionally and mentally through various conversations, right? Especially as you start to raise much more money, right? The team gets larger. The ability to handle different seniorities of people for young founders, can be very challenging. And that's why in some ways getting the right type of investors on board that understands this is important. So I think founders also should assess the investors, whether they are a good fit for the culture you're trying to build for yourself and the company.
I also want to address the topic of founders' leadership styles and delegation, because I believe that a lot of times founders tend to take everything on themselves, and that's also a leading cause. But so what do you think about this?
I think that if you're just starting a company, a very small team, maybe less than 5 people, that can happen very frequently. And I think you need to start recognizing that typically you may not be the best person to do certain tasks, right? Just because everybody has slightly different skill sets. So maybe go back and think about, well, why do you start the company with this group of people? Or why do you bring this group of people on board, right? And figure out and making sure that they also have the ability to own some of the outcomes, right? As a means of delegation. So the risk, there are risks to delegation, is that you over delegate. And I think that there is as the founder and providing the leadership for the team, that still the ability to kind of engage after delegation is important, right? I mean, it's of course much easier in a larger company with very well defined roles, and that's typically what happens as you grow the company. You get much more specialized roles, and you expect a person to be able to do the job very well, right? But it's a very narrow and niche kind of responsibility. But for a young team, maybe around 5 people, maybe at most 10 people, the job roles tend to be more fluid. And as a founder, you need to understand that this is typical and that you need to be able to engage after delegation, if you will, and at the same time to engage in a way that enables and making sure that the person has the tools, the right set of tools, is empowered to do what you expect, right? The opposite is, even as you bring on more people, you still do the person's job of what you wanted the person to do in the first place. Then you kind of set yourself up to have a high chance of being overwhelmed. And so there is a need to sort of make sure that there's sufficient communication to make sure that you are aligned in what you're trying to achieve, right? And I think that's so key in a very small team, the ability to communicate. And actually that's also a strength, because you're small, you can actually communicate and move faster, as opposed to a large company, right? So I would say that size is to the advantage, also a challenge for the team, because then you don't want to take on too much that you cannot handle. And as founders, that tend to happen because we tend to be the person that says, we can do it, never say die attitude, right? And I think that needs to be moderated somewhat as you develop the team further, because there is only a limited number of hours. And you need to start thinking about priorities, right? And that is very, very hard. But you have to recognize that priorities are important. Prioritizing process, how do you come to certain decisions, are important. And you need to be really quite clear about the logical decisions, right, that you make. And then after that, letting that trigger down to the whole team and making sure that there's kind of right ownership, right structure to allow the team to execute. Pretty challenging, but for a founder, typically in the first few years, you tend to have to take on more roles than expected, but you need to then learn how to delegate and engage effectively, which is not easy, right? So I would say that try to talk to more experienced founders, try to talk to other people who have kind of been through that, right? And fortunately for most startups, the phases of growth are quite similar. The challenge they face are quite similar. So talking to somebody more experienced can help in formulating your own strategies, right, to manage the team. But as I said, there's no right answer. There's no fixed playbook about that. But there are certain best practices that you can adopt, right? For example, making sure that everybody's on the same page. There's certain structure to the discussion, that you want to build up a regular cadence, setting clear agendas, making sure that there's clear actionable outcomes to the meeting. All those also help to manage the task and responsibilities.
Yeah, and I think talking about tasks, there's a lot of things that a founder can do. There's always things to do. And one thing I learned is choosing what you want to do and like fighting the battles that you can win, because there's so many things out of your control and so many things are reliant on people getting back to you or you're just waiting. So I'm sure you would have had similar cases. You just choose to focus on certain things. And That's a big lesson I had, lesson I learned as well.
Yeah, that's right. And remember to celebrate the small wins.
Yep.
Right? I think that's quite important because typically it's hard to change the world in a week. Okay. So, but very often you can take small steps towards saying, developing an alpha prototype, beta prototype, even having the first tester. Those are quite useful moments to celebrate with the team, right? And also to then take some time off high levels of stress when you're trying to build something, right? It's a very stressful job, building something new nobody has developed or thought about.
Yep. For us, we even celebrate simple things like birthdays or
Right.
personal wins as well. So
That's right.
It really helps in long-term success. And you mentioned this a few times. It's like a long-term game, not a short-lived thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like 8-10 years. So it's like a marathon. So you can't just fight at high level for the whole years.
That's right.
Yeah. And I mean, this is more personal, but are you able to share like a personal experience where you're almost feeling burnout, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah. Usually how I handle stress is exercise, right? I was track and field before. I wasn't super great at it. I was a great athlete, but I think that at least it taught me that after exercise, I usually feel much better.
Yeah.
Right. And so therefore I've always been, whenever there was a huge, in the past it was exams, I always make sure that I get my enough exercise, enough serotonin. It also clears my mind, right? So you have to, every founder is a bit different, every person different. I haven't figured out how to meditate well, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that maybe I could also try that. But for me, it's really the exercise gives you an immediate, I would say, relief from some of the stresses. How do you deal with the new diet, nutrition, and so on? All also equally important, right? And there's so many movement now that people start to, biohack themselves. They wear insulin patches and they track over a 7-day period, even though they are not on the diabetic regime. So getting to know yourself better and your hormonal levels could also be another way to make data-driven choices. But I've not gone to the extreme. For me, it's very simple. Just exercise,
natural stuff.
Exercise, and maybe for me, spending time with the family. Yeah, those are good ways I can manage my stress. But I can tell you that, starting a company, building a team, probably is one of the hardest career anybody can choose to have. You really need the supportive environment, and you have to create the supportive environment for yourself.
Yep.
Surround yourself with the peers and the family members that would naturally be supportive, because those play a very important role in a fairly long journey to success.
Yeah.
Few companies can be wildly successful in the first 3 years, right? So most unicorn companies take on average 8 to 12 years. For a technology company, for a deep technology company, if you're working on a hardware product, it can take 15 years or more, right, to become highly valuable. So you need a very deep support system. It cannot be fairly superficial, right?
Yeah.
And you also often have to go back to the original intention of starting the company, right? Why did I start a company in the first place? Was it something that you truly care about, and that even if you have to spend many years on it, that is worth your time? I think that's something you always have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, we do that. I do it in my startup as well. Like, we occasionally have meetings. We just don't do anything but talk about why everybody has joined the startup.
Yeah.
Why in this game,
That's right.
You're not working a normal life, and you're taking not a 9-to-5 option, like a 9-to-9, 24/7.
That's right.
And why?
Yeah, in some way, actually being somewhere in the academic environment is like the perennial startup. You're always in a startup mode. That aspect has kind of stuck with me as I have been able to work with teams, different kinds of teams, to launch their products or services. For really, I had my second company. There was a YC back, and I'm fortunate to have Prof, who's my wonderful co-founder, who really shared at least the vision when we first started the company, right?
Yeah.
What we wanted to achieve. So having that, I would say the co-founder team is very important.
Yeah, you need the right people.
That's
And I think it's because it's a long game and you can't afford to have people who you don't have synergy with. And you have to make a lot of difficult decisions and you can't do it alone. So, and going back to like a point you mentioned on family and like, I guess a lot of the founders as they grow older, you start to get more commitments, more personal life commitments, because you spend like 5, 6, 7 years in a singular target. But then you start going on and you realize that life is a lot more things and dimensions than just this. So how can a founder even begin to understand these other dimensions?
Well, I would say that there are many aspects to happiness, right? And I think work is one way to derive happiness. But I think as you develop and grow over time, family, then the network that becomes important. The family actually becomes important. But they might be an added boost to your aspirations, actually, if they are highly supportive.
Yeah.
Right? And we have heard many stories of the founder's partner playing a crucial role in managing different aspects of the family requirements, right? So there are many stories around that. So you probably also want to have a thought around as you start family and so on. Will you have the support, right, to do something that is very difficult, may take you away from home quite a lot? There's no right way to deal with it, but generally, I think having open communication right at the beginning is important, right? Rather than having an implosion event.
Yeah.
Right, later on.
Building up and
it's very challenging though.
Yeah. Yep. And I guess towards the end, like, what kind of resources do you think founders can resort to? Are you personally part of any of these groups or programs that founders can share experiences?
Well, okay, so I am part of, because of my second company, we got into Y Combinator. There's a strong network of founders, right? Many of them families and so on. So I'm part of that network. The other network is the academic network within the National University of Singapore, right? Where we have different kinds of wellness programs. We even have an office that looks after employee wellness, right? So those are things that we can leverage. I'm in a position where I actually help many founders launch their first company.
Yeah.
And it's quite a, I would say, privileged position. And I'm also, that's why I'm really starting to think about how we can make sure they have the right support as a founder who has a very different career compared to, say, a more typical job that you would be able to find. Like 9 to 5, for example, kind of job, which I think may have slightly different demands, right, on the mental health of the person. So we are thinking around creating, and making sure that there are programs to support founder health, because we recognize that a healthy company, at least for a startup, for the first 5 years, the founder role is essential. It's critical to its growth.
Yeah, it's important for founders to have some groups. For example, I'm part of a few WhatsApp groups or Telegram groups with a bunch of friends that we talk when, not professional stuff, but as a person, like personal things. So having this support system is really important. And I guess, there's this unique that people, which I also experienced or spoken to before, that don't believe in burnout. Like, they think that burnout is like, a mental frame of mind.
Right.
Have you come across such things? And like, as founders who are so ambitious and visionary, burnout seems like a distraction. Do you think that's real? Do you think burnout is actually a real thing?
Well, burnout is absolutely a real thing, right? There's no
100%.
doubt about that, right? I think what varies is how much work leads to a burnout. I think that's
Okay.
It's very hard to put a number, right?
Yeah.
How many hours a week leads to burnout, and it's very individual. Right? But I think that one way to start tracking is just how many hours do you have time off to work on your own mental well-being or your health. For founders, I would say expect much higher numbers than 40 hours a week. And sometimes you can compress a lot of the hours, but you definitely need some break. Sleep is always essential also, right? So make sure that there is, at least you get sufficient sleep. And everybody has slightly different number of hours. Some people need average on 8 hours, which is most recommended. Right. But you can compress it, but make sure that you get enough break after that, right? So I took a class at Stanford, and what I learned was there's something called a sleep debt. I don't know if you heard about this. Most people heard about it. And basically, sleep is a debt that needs to be repaid. So if you keep accumulating too much sleep debt, it's going to very negatively impact your health, how you make decisions, and your relationship with people, which are all also important aspects of growing the company. So therefore, I highly recommend you get enough sleep based on what you need. And it's quite interesting because after the course, and there's stories where, I read during the course, I learned that, if you have sleep sufficiently, you no longer can sleep, which is quite interesting. And we actually did the experiment in the class where somebody actually slept a lot, and after that told the what do you do to me? I can no longer sleep anymore.
Wow.
Right? So and that was interesting, right? But it brings on the point that sleep is something your body can naturally regulate, and that if you feel that you need to sleep, right, please do so, because it's a natural process.
You feel.
Yeah, and definitely that there are people who say, oh, you don't need sleep and you can keep going. I think for the short term that might be okay if you're really facing a very tough deadline that you want to meet. But in the long run, that happening too frequently will end up becoming very detrimental to the growth of the company. Right. And I think this needs to be communicated to all the stakeholders.
You're right, because when I go to meetings, once in a while I yawn, and it's very unprofessional, and I'll obviously cover it up, but then it's like, you're not in your optimal state of mind.
Yeah.
But maybe 6 years ago, when I was still in my early 20s, it's a lot easier not sleep a lot, but still have high efficiency. So
that's right.
I can definitely see that sleep debt. And I did a study. I researched on it as well myself. It's something which founders want to try to optimize for, because we want to see how much time can we spend on the business. And sometimes optimizing your sleep and rest is quite important. And having 8 hours of time, understanding how sleep works to effectively even nap throughout the day to get ideal working conditions. So that's something which I also actively do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the power nap is real, and typically 40 minutes or so can be sufficient to just recharge quickly, and then hopefully last a bit longer. And then, but you still need that continuous hours of sleep, because there are a lot of biological processes that goes on when you sleep that the power nap cannot get you, right? So at the end of the day, if you're not healthy, with a healthy state of mind, the company is not going to grow.
Yeah. I've heard of cases where investors just back off because the founder has a lot of health issues or problems. And imagine putting a lot of money and the founder is not healthy enough to manage it. So
that's right.
It's a zero problem. If I would ask you for a few closing thoughts on founders burnout or moving forward, what kind of advice would you give to founders maybe in the early stage, or I guess any stage, where they have to not give up, but at the same time know how to take a break, I guess?
Well, if you're listening to this, definitely spend some time exercising today, if you haven't already, right? It will immediately give you the shot of serotonin that you need, right? Or some other hormones that you need to quickly lower your stress levels. If you have been experiencing prolonged levels of stress, you probably should quickly talk to people, right? And you feel that they are impairing your decision making. I think most people can recognize that something isn't right, and you need to kind of listen to what your body's telling you, and do not be afraid to talk to anyone about what you're feeling, and don't see burnt out as something that should not happen to you, right? And that you can just power through everything. I think that would be a fairly short-term kind of thinking that may impact the long-term growth of your company, right? And reach out to various support systems. There are many support systems around your community. For NUS, we have many, right? So I can speak on what I know, and leverage the founder community, because most of the time we are fairly positive people. I would like to think. Otherwise, you won't start a company in the first place. Founding a company is probably the most difficult career anyone can have, but it's also a very rewarding one. But do not let the stress of founding a company get to you to a point where you forget why you started in the first place, and then the whole thing doesn't work out.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest takeaways is listen to your body. A lot of times, simple signs like you have a sore throat or you have like some body ache. Like I think physical and mental health are very connected. So
yeah,
I feel like a lot of times the body is telling you something, but the founder chooses not to listen to it. I'm personally, guilty of that. But yeah, I think that's very useful. Listen to your body, understand that there's many support systems around, and just do minor steps every single day. So in the long term, it kind of adds up.
We need to address mental and health well-being of founders, because it's the most stressful job, I think, that you can ever choose to do.
Yeah. Thanks so much for spending time here. Thanks so much, Prof. Yeah.
Thank you.